Pointers?
Little Milton.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he just asked me to take him off the list. I don't even know where he is. I've never met him before. Never heard the name. You know, I'm pretty good.
I thought I'd send him a halfway decent letter.
You did. You sent a great letter. Doesn't mean he's going to listen.
No, sir, it doesn't. I noticed that right away.
Lots of seats up front, Mary.
Come on, Dan. Go, buddy. Rush yourself.
There will be like an intermission after we go through our presentation to go get coffee and cookies and what have you. During that time, we will collect your questions, and then we'll be presenting the questions to the speakers. Mary, your seat's up front here.
All right.
You can always take one of the seats up front and move it back. We are going to start in about 5 minutes. Our speakers are running a little late. In fact, we're probably going to start just the introduction and what have you. What are our first speakers? Gene? We're going. That's good, Mike. That's good.
Yeah, actually, I got a real flag in my car if you want that.
Good evening. Good evening. First, I would like to say that we're very privileged to use this beautiful facility. This facility ostensibly is a church, but a church is not necessarily a building. A church is the fellowship. A long time ago, somebody said that whenever 2 or 3 of you are gathered in my name, that is a church. Nonetheless, this is the home of the church. Can you hear me? Hello? It is better. A long time ago, somebody said, whenever 2 or 3 of you are gathered in my name, that is a church. This is the home of the New Life Fellowship. That is the Orthodox Presbyterian Church of Presbyterian world, so to speak. And we also are here to talk about civic awareness. Somebody else also said, render under God what is God, and render under Caesar what is Caesar. Caesar being a euphemism for the government. And we are to respect our leaders. But we have a unique situation here in the United States of America. We have a government that recognizes our Creator. The only government on the face of the earth that does so recognize it. And therefore, we also are the government ourselves. It's the first 3 letters of the Constitution, we the people. So we ask that, in Jesus' name, that Lord keep you with us tonight, enlighten our people, let us do our civic duty in a civil manner, let us hear the speakers, treat them and each other with fairness, and please may I ask everyone to respect the place that we're in. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Could we all rise? I pledge to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. He's going to put up an agenda there in a moment because you got to bring up a flag. I didn't realize we didn't have a flag here at this church. We are the Ottawa County Patriots. I'd like to welcome everybody here. And how many people have never been to an Ottawa County Patriots meeting or function before? Please raise your hand. Thank you all for coming. You may have some preconceived notion as to what the Ottawa County Patriots is or aren't. We ostensibly are a tea party. But we're a little bit different than just about every other group of this type in the state. We are a nonpartisan 501c4. That means that we cannot advocate for a candidate. We can't say vote for Joe, vote for Stan, vote for Fred, or whatever. That legally we cannot. In fact, we'd lose our nonprofit status if we did. And by the way, it's a C4, not a C3. What does that mean? If we were a C3 and you wanted to write a nice check, you could write it off. A C4, we can't give you a tax deduction. We wanted to. We did apply for a C3, but a woman by the name of Lois Lerner and the organization known as the Internal Revenue Service sort of ignored us for 3 years and then finally decided to give us a C4. How do we do our business? We are an education and an awareness organization. We do adhere to limited constitutional government, fiscal responsibility, free markets. We actively encourage you people to become civic involved. Right? And we do not support any political party because the IRS would come and cut our heads off. And what do we do? What do we do at our meetings? Well, you know what we're going to do tonight. We're going to talk about Proposal 1. What have we done in the past? Well, you've probably heard about the Dewey Hill Cross and the and the Hager Park sign. We had a very similar forum to that a few weeks ago. And Joey, some of the young men, I think we're going to need some more chairs. When Joey comes back, we'll grab him to do that. So we had a very similar, very civil pro and con speakers up in Grand Haven at the community center. We always try to get pro and con. We had a meeting, we were still over in the library, and we brought in Becky McDonald to talk about human trafficking, young people in sexual slavery, terrible, terrible situation. And I hope everybody will understand that we didn't want to bring anybody in to be pro on that. But we did talk about DHS immigration policies. We had I'm not supposed to use his title, but he's associated with the Democratic Party. And we had a state legislator and so on. We even talked about pot meeting. No, we didn't have pot laying out on our goodie table. But we did talk about both sides. We heard about Ebola. Good, bad, what are the facts, so on and so forth. We talked about Common Core. We tackled the subject of white privilege. We had a number of panelists of color speaking. We weren't able to get the person who was originally going to take part in that. Common Core, which is another discussion. We may get something like that on again. And we had a young lady who, at 17 years old, was part of the Dutch resistance in the Netherlands. And that was one of those ones that we didn't have something to pro one. And I didn't think we could get Adolf to talk about that. Again, these are the kind of things we do. We try to get speakers on both sides of the issue and educate. And this is the way we do it. We feel that an informed citizenry is best served when there are multi-perspectives of those things. With that, what's next on our agenda? Okay, what I'd like to introduce our moderator, which will be Michael Carras. He is the secretary of our organization. My name is Jim Chiodo. I'm the president of the organization. Carrie is our sergeant at arms, and Judy Curtis is our vice president, and Gene Welch is our treasurer. I want to thank everybody for coming, and now I'm going to introduce the panel. We have Cindy Ganrat, who is the newly elected state representative from the 80th district down in the southern part of the area. We have Todd Korser from the 82nd district. We have Steve Boltheis, who is the executive director, not president, executive director of the OTTAWA Area Coordinating Council. And that is sort of representing all the counties and governmental units sort of bring together, to work together. Then we have Steve Byrd, who is the Ottawa County Road Commissioner. Tom. I'm sorry. I know it's Tom. I don't know why it's this here. And with that, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Michael Carras, and he will explain the rest of the program and set the stage.
How's this? Okay. Again, my name is Michael Carras. I'm going to be moderating the panelists of a panel discussion. hopefully they'll do all the most stuff. Let's start by looking at the actual proposal, the language of the proposal of Prop 1 on the ballot. I've emphasized here the words which have left, there's a lot of echo here. Is there a way to, I've emphasized the words which have led many to characterize this proposal as whether or not we should adopt another road tax in Michigan. I hope, well, only the stuff in the yellow box is really the proposal. The state has added some additional language on the ballot to help explain what's in the yellow box. So that's what we're here to talk about this evening. Let me also share with you some facts about the proposal. The proposal, first of all, is an amendment to the Michigan Constitution. But it is also a proposal to activate 10 other laws which the legislature adopted and made contingent on this proposal. Although these amount to roughly, altogether, these amount to about 45,000 words of new statutes. We have to wonder whether the ballot language, which I just showed you, conveys to the voters all that is contained in the proposed amendment and new laws. By way of comparison, the entire U.S. Constitution is about 4,500 words long, and the Declaration is just 1,500 words long. Would you feel comfortable summarizing, say, the entire U.S. Constitution in just a couple of hundred words? I think we need to know more about what is really in this proposal, and I hope the panelists appreciate that. Next, I'll show you an estimate of the financial impact of this proposal prepared by the state government. As you can see, approximately $2 billion a year of additional revenues would be collected annually from Michigan taxpayers. I hope you can get the total on the bottom there.
Michael, you do realize that you'd have to have excellent eyes to read that. And it's, you know, there's nothing you can do about it, I'm sure, but I've been to three presentations and you can't read what's on the screen.
Would it be possible to turn off the perimeter lights? That might help some.
Yes.
Well, I'm going to let the panelists, I'm sure that they're all familiar with these numbers and know them inside and out. But if they want, I can put this chart back up there for them if they want to speak to that. For example, next year, about $500 million of this money would be spent on road work. We'll be collecting about $2 billion a year in new revenue, the state will, and next year they'll spend about $500 million of this on road work. And that would rise to about $800 million in the following year, or maybe not. Because we don't really know yet what the legislature will do a couple of years from now. Well, let me also show you something that is omitted in this financial summary and is only hinted at in the language on the ballot. The earned income tax credit allowance will be raised from 6% to 20% if this proposal is adopted. The state government estimates that this will amount to roughly an additional $250 million of transfer payments annually from the state treasury to a small percentage of taxpayers in the state. This forum is not about whether or not the roads in Michigan are in a state of disrepair. They are. But let's be sure, and I want to test that assumption. Is there anyone in the room who does not agree that Michigan's roads are in a state of disrepair and in need of immediate attention? I thought so. Given the universal acceptance of this assumption, there should be no need to spend time on this aspect of Prop 1, and attention can be focused elsewhere, as the panelists see fit. Time is limited this evening, and it would be a waste, it should not be wasted on something that everyone already agrees on. So let me make something else very clear. We have not advised the panelists on what they should suggest as reasons for supporting or opposing this particular ballot proposal. We have asked them to consider the following questions as they offer us their perspectives. Prop 1 asks the voters to approve a wide range of tax and spending changes in Michigan. The net effect of these changes will be to increase the amount of money flowing through Lansing. So first question which could be addressed is this: money is power. Prop 1 would increase the power of Lansing. Is Lansing currently too powerful or not yet powerful enough? Proponents of Prop 1 are invited to explain why Lansing's overall power should be increased further. Opponents of Prop 1 are invited to explain why Lansing already has too much power and doesn't need any more. Prop 1 would take money and the power to decide how to spend that money from nearly every citizen and give it to the state government. All of the panelists are invited to characterize, as they see fit, this taking. This taking will not be uniform, however. It would impact some citizens more so than others. Proponents are asked to explain why this non-uniform taking would be a good thing. Opponents are asked to explain why it would be a bad thing. I would remind the panelists that the very first section of the first article of Michigan's Constitution states, all political power is inherent in the people. Government is instituted for their equal benefit, security, and protection. Proposal 1 includes a constitutional amendment. What impact would adoption of this proposal have on earlier popular constitutional amendments, such as the Headley Amendment, which established a ceiling on state government expenditures? And would it effectively nullify Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution that I just read to you? In the last term, the legislature tied the approval of 10 new laws to adoption of this proposal. These new laws are not readily available to most citizens and only hinted at in the language on the ballot. What, for example, are the other transportation purposes mentioned in the ballot language? Why should universities be explicitly excluded from receiving any of the funds raised by this proposal? Why does the EITC, the Earned Income Tax Credit allowance, need to be raised so significantly, and so on? Why are all the various elements of Prop 1 wrapped up in a single ballot proposal? Why must they be all considered together at the same time? Why should they all be adopted together or rejected together? What will happen if this proposal is adopted on May 5th? What can happen if this proposal is not adopted? Is there any other way to address all of the various issues wrapped up in this proposal if this proposal is not adopted? For example, can Michigan's roads be repaired if Prop 1 does not pass? Is there any other way to raise the EITC allowance, assuming that's a good idea, if this proposal fails? And so on. And now I'm going to turn over the microphone to the panelists. We're going to start with Representative Cindy Gamrat. Remind her that she can allocate 15 minutes. Good luck, Cindy. So give me a moment.
Are there question answers? Okay, all right. Well, thank you. First, I want to thank Michael and Jim and those who are putting this on tonight for your community. I've spoken already at other town halls, on the radio, done a TV show about Prop 1, and one thing's for certain, people are wanting to know about it, the conversations out there, and there are many people in different communities trying to inform their citizens, and I think that's awesome, and I know what goes into putting these things on. So can we just thank them for a minute for what the time that they did? And then I want to apologize to you for being late today. It's been a long day in Lansing, and for those of you who don't know, I'm on the Appropriations Committee, and we just passed, in fact, I brought it with me because I just happened to have it here, and I'm sharing this with you because it's pertinent, actually. It goes along with what we're talking about tonight, the omnibus budget, and we just passed that out of the House yesterday, which includes the transportation budget, so I have fresh numbers for you out of the House. It still needs to go to the Senate, so it can change and all that, but I can give you some insight on what's going on there. And then today, we passed out of the House the education budget. I was a no vote on both of them, the only Republican no vote, because I still have some concerns with it. But when I'm going around talking about Prop 1, one of the things I usually have with me is a cheat sheet. And yesterday I went to the they got me on a timer. I went to the Grand Rapids Chamber of Commerce breakfast. It was a governmental affairs breakfast, and I sat on a panel with other representatives and senators. And you know, this is a breakfast where business leaders in their community, these people are in the know. This is what they do. They read legislation, they study legislation, and the entire morning was full of questions. And I pointed that out to them because what Michael mentioned earlier is one of the biggest concerns about Prop 1 that I'm getting feedback from my constituents, and that is it's confusing. People aren't sure what's in it. And when you try to take 47,000 words with, I think there's 8, 9, 10 statutes and constitutional changes and boil it down into a few paragraphs, really? You know, what's in it? I don't know if any legislator has read all 47,000 words. You know, so all of us have cheat sheets, you know, different notes that we're taking because we can't even remember everything that's in it and know everything that's in it. So that's a concern to me. That's a concern to me because we're talking about a constitutional amendment. We're talking about something that's changing our Constitution forever, unless it's changed again. Not that I am against all constitutional amendment changes, but when people aren't sure what they're voting on, you know, and it's that large and that complex, I have a concern about that. Because once we put this in, guys, it's in. And so whether it does what it's supposed to do or not, in raising those funds, what happens if it doesn't do what we think it's supposed to do? You know, we have very little recourse at that time except to pass another constitutional amendment, which is very difficult. And so, so that's one first concern that I hear from my constituents, and I'm just going to share with you my concerns about it. I don't ever want to tell anybody how to vote. I'll tell you how I'm going to vote and why. And then you can make up your own mind after hearing all the panelists. And I do empathize. The other panelists that I've spoken with are road commissioners, and I've spoken to leaders in my own community, township leaders in the road commission. And I'll tell you what, they're frustrated, and I don't blame them. You know, they want to fix the roads, and they've been waiting years and years, and not a lot has happened. And so, you know, we all want to fix the roads. And so, and do you put your faith in us, legislators, or do you pass this? That seems to be kind of the question. But so the first big complaint I get is it's confusing. We don't know what's in it. And I use my cheat sheet up. I don't even know where I left it the last time. I've carried it so many places. So Mike, thanks for putting the numbers up there because if we need to pull them back up again, I don't have my cheat sheet with me. So number one, it's confusing. Number two, it's a constitutional amendment. And so there's a lot of weight that's carried onto this, and do we want to do it? Number three, it raises taxes. And we're talking about raising the sales tax, making Michigan one of the second highest sales taxes in the nation. And it's a 16.7% sales tax. They want to say it's just 1 cent. You know how marketing does it, and they show the school buses with the children going over the crumbly bridges, and they just say 1%, and all that is just that marketing, that messaging to try to tug on your emotions. But when it comes down to it, that sales tax is going to make everybody's lives more expensive. So everything you do throughout the day, everything you purchase is going to be more expensive. The numbers I've seen from Mackinac Center and from other places range from about 400 to 800, somewhere there per family for the average family of 4. And Michael mentioned this earlier, it disproportionately affects those in the lower class and seniors. Sometimes it's called a regressive tax. And so I ran and campaigned on lower taxes, smaller government, and that's the way I want to see things go, and so I maintain that. If we're going to raise taxes on Michigan citizens, that should be the very, very last step to take. First, I think we need to comb through the budget and prioritize our spending on roads and transportation and the things that are in our Constitution. The governor just came out and he did, what was it called, the river of opportunity. Okay, so when the year started, he spoke a lot about the river of opportunity. And he talked a lot about programs and how programs don't fix things. And he mentioned a number of times, and I remember that we had over 140 programs, and not all of them were really doing what they should. And sitting on appropriations now, I've been able to go through budgets and see a number of those programs. And so for me, if we're spending money on programs that aren't in our Constitution and not really doing what they should, I think, first of all, we need to prioritize our budget with the money that we have in there. The other thing it raises instead of sales tax is at the pump, we're going to pay, numbers I've seen, about 10 to 12 cents more per gallon. And so every time you go to fill up your gas tank, you're going to pay more. Registrations go up as well. And so there's a number of increases on the Michigan families and businesses of Michigan. And for me, I don't think that's the way to go. I'm concerned about, when we pass things, there's always those unintended consequences. You know how we don't know everything, and we don't have a crystal ball. And so what is the unintended consequence if we're taking $2 billion out of the private sector every year? I mean, just think about that. An additional $2 billion out of the private sector of Michigan every year. On families and businesses, what's the unintended consequences? And once it's done, it's done. Trying to think of what other questions that Jim had on there. Mike, you took your questions down. How about Plan Bs, other options? Now, I'm not going to go off his questions now. I'm just going to, maybe they'll come up later. I get asked a lot about Plan Bs or other options. What else is out there? If we don't pass this, then what happens? Because a lot of us are like, we just want our roads fixed. My goodness, does it have to be so hard to get our roads fixed? So what are the Plan Bs? Well, right now, I can just let you know that what disappointed me about the budget that we just passed is that it actually cut funding for transportation. They cut funding $89 million out of transportation budget. Yet we funded programs that are new programs like dental care and government daycare and all sorts of things. And so when people talk about what are some Plan Bs, there's a number of ways that we can approach this. Just like when you do your budget, when I do my budget at home, and if we have something new that we have to pay for, there's different ways I can do that. I can take smaller amounts of money from different pools in my budget and kind of add those all up to cover the new thing. Or you can take it big chunks out of one or two things. Maybe you have some savings account or something else big that you can take it from. So there's different approaches that we can also do in Lansing. And some people say, well, will it be easy? Well, the money that's allocated in the budget that we just passed, I think, was about $53 billion. And so it's not like there's an extra pot of $1 billion or $2 billion that is just sitting there, not being used. But can we do it? Yes. Yes, we can. We can do it by changing the laws. We can do it by transferring money from state restricted funds from one fund to another, or expanding the use of state restricted funds. And we've been doing that. We've been doing that all year. It does take legislative changes, but that's what you pay us for, right? That's what we're here for, is to do the work and to comb through the budgets and to do all that, in my opinion anyway. You know, that's the job that we're supposed to do. And so I do have faith in my colleagues that if the people say no, and I think that's what's going to happen, or at least that's what all the indicators say, then that is a mandate that is sending it back to the legislature, that we do not want to raise our taxes. We want you guys to figure out how to fund it with the current budget that we already have. So we have about 43% of our budget is federal dollars. And then there's another chunk that's state restricted, and then there's about $10 billion that's general fund. And so some Plan Bs that are out there are kind of more, I would say it's more of a soft whisper campaign that's happening with Plan Bs. It's not a strong discussion that's happening in Lansing right now. And I think the reason is twofold. One is because there's a deference to, the governor really wants to see this passed. And there's not, not a lot of people want to come up and stand up against what the governor wants to see passed. And so there's some deference to that and to the legislators that put this forward last term. And then there's deference to the people. Let's see, okay, they're going to have a vote, and let's see what they decide and which way they're going to go. And so, however, there's, I would say, more freshmen that are talking about Plan Bs, but there's a number of others. Senator Colbeck has been working on a variety of different options. I've been working on some legislation. Representative Corser has, and a number of others. And so we are already starting to think about it, to prepare so that if and when this doesn't pass, that the conversations are already going and legislation is already being drafted. And I've heard a number of different things. Some suggestions that take it more out of a large pool, kind of. For instance, higher education. How much time do I have? We spend, I think it's about $700 million on higher ed, subsidizing higher education to universities such as University of Michigan. In fact, we just increased our higher ed budget in this budget. These universities have billions of dollars in endowments, and so do we take that money in one big chunk and move it over to the roads? That's been thrown out. There's $500 million in the DNR trust fund that's sitting there, and there's been overflow into the Parks Endowment Fund from that, about $200 million. Do we take a big chunk out of there? Those would be kind of the big chunk items. Representative Lucido is looking at a big chunk move. And then there's some smaller ones too, where you can take the government daycare program that I was telling you about. I've written legislation to cancel that. That's about a $130 million program for government subsidized daycare. I don't think it's the scope of the state government to run around daycare centers and make sure they have covers in their plugs and those kinds of things. That's $130 million. So it doesn't cover the entire road need, but it could be part of it. And so that would be maybe a smaller chunk. And so there's a number of conversations that's happening in Lansing regarding Plan Bs, and I do think, we're already talking about, and I'm already planning on, that's probably where I have to spend my summer, is in Lansing, working on this. But that's okay. That's my job as a servant leader too. I would be proud, I would be honored to be able to come up with a solution that Michigan can be proud of for our road packages, and not something that raises taxes on our citizens and that we have to plug our nose when we go and vote for. So I'll just go ahead and give my time away at this point, unless there was something major, and then wait for question and answer. So thank you so much. God bless you guys. And
reminder, you should have, or you can ask for a 3x5 card if you have questions, if you want to address to Cindy or any of the other panelists, write them down, and after all the panelists are done, we'll collect those questions. Some of the members of the OCP will go around and collect those 3x5 cards, and we will then organize them and present them to the panelists. The next speaker now is going to be Tom, okay? Mr. Tom Bird.
Yes. Good evening. While Mike is getting the slides up, let me take exception to the marching orders for tonight. I will talk a little bit about the condition of the roads because as an engineer and someone who's been involved in management for 50 years, I'm used to solving problems. And in order to solve a problem, you have to understand the nature of what you're dealing with. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the road conditions and how we got there so you can understand what we need to do to get out of the dilemma. So the first slide is just briefly what I'm going to be talking about tonight. The problem, the history, the needs, and the solutions. Next slide. You all know what the problem is. We've all agreed on this. The roads are falling apart. But when we talk about the roads, you need to know a little bit about the statistics. Michigan has 124,000 miles in its total road system. 13,000 miles of that is controlled and maintained by MDOT under what we call the state trunk line system. These are the interstate highway systems, the M designated routes, and the US designated routes. The other 90,000 miles are maintained by counties, mostly by road commissions, and then 21,000 miles are controlled by cities and villages that are incorporated and receive funds to do their own maintenance. Now, of this 124,000 miles, we have two pools of funding. One is the federal aid system, which is a give back of the federal tax money on your gasoline that comes from Washington. The federal aid system covers 44,300 miles of roads. Now, if you look at the breakdown there, MDOT controls 13,000 of those miles, which is about 29%. But they get 75% of the federal aid money pool. The locals, the road commissions in cities and villages control 31,200 miles, which is 71% of those major roads, and yet we only get 25% of the federal funding. So there's the first problem that raises its ugly head. We don't really talk too much about bridges. We have 10,900 bridges that we track here in Michigan. 4,400 of them are in the MDOT system, that's 40%. They get 85% of the federal aid money for bridges. The locals control 6,500 of those bridges, which is 60% of them, and we get 15% of the federal aid money. So you're beginning to see the nature of the problem here. Next slide, this one. The road conditions right now, if we look at the non-federal aid roads, which are the ones that we, the road commission, are involved in, 10% of them are rated good, 41% are rated fair, and almost 50% are rated poor. The source of this is the State Asset Management Council. We use standardized measurement techniques for quantifying the condition of each of the roads. We drive them every year and rate them. And if you look at the next slide, you look at the spread in here. And this is a chilling slide for somebody involved in maintaining the roads. There are very few roads that are in a grade 10, which is the highest grade. Those are the ones that have been newly repaved. They begin to deteriorate immediately. It's the second law of thermodynamics in action. If you go down to a mid-range rating of 5, that's when the roads begin to transition from fair to poor. Now, unfortunately, if you look at this slide, within the next year or two, another 20% of the roads are going to transition into the poor category. So we're going to wind up with 70% of our road system in poor condition. The difference here is if you're taking a road that's a grade 7 and you want to move it back up into good condition, You can do that for anywhere from $6,000 to $75,000 a mile, depending on the road treatment you use to preserve those roads. Once the road gets down to a grade 5, transitioning into grade 4, now you're looking at about 4 times the cost per mile to restore those roads to decent condition. You're looking at anywhere from $180,000 a mile to $1 million a mile to reconstruct the roads. So obviously, we want to keep the roads to the left side of that scale wherever possible. And good stewardship says you invest the money in maintenance early on to preserve the roads, to keep them from deteriorating. We haven't been able to do that for quite some time. Next slide. Look at the county road system here in Ottawa. We have 923 miles of primary roads. Those are the roads that most of you use going from one place to another, the major arteries. We have 426 miles of what we call the local road system. Those are the secondary roads that lead to where you live. Total of 1,350 miles that we maintain, and another 328 miles of gravel roads. Interestingly, in the state, about 50% of the road system is gravel, so we have a very small percentage of our road system that is gravel construction. Unfortunately, it costs more to maintain a paved road than a gravel road. When we last rated our roads, about 19% were in good condition, 47% were fair, 34% were poor. We ranked 61 out of 83 counties, so we're a little ahead of the curve in terms of averages. But the roads are still in bad shape, so you can imagine what some of the other counties are dealing with. Now, these numbers have slipped a bit since this data was taken. The numbers this year will be worse, and we'll probably, with those, the 200 miles that we're transitioning from fair to poor, if you add those to the 320 miles that are poor, we'll wind up with about 50% of our road system in poor condition within a year or two. And that's when any of the money that's been proposed starts to phase in. So let's look at the underlying cause, the next slide. We have insufficient resources to properly maintain the roads. The reason for that is 20 years of chronic underfunding and funds being diverted for other purposes. Those of you who remember Prop A when it was passed, the sales tax was increased, and to offset the increased cost, you were given the opportunity to have your primary residents receive a 50% tax offset to compensate for the increase in sales tax. And the way things worked through the legislature, it was a nice, neat package. Everything was going to balance out, and everything would work out just fine. Well, it didn't happen that way. The net result was the schools were short-funded, and the money for local revenue sharing wasn't there to give. So our legislature, and we're not pointing fingers at anybody in the room here, this happened 20 years ago. And the good thing about term limits is those guys are long gone, and we have a new set of people dealing with the current problems. So they decided, well, we're going to start the shell game. We'll put a sales tax on gasoline at the wholesale level. And instead of that money going to the roads, it will become general income. It goes into the general fund. 75% of that goes to the schools. The other 25% goes into things like revenue sharing back to the community. And that patched a couple of holes. So the shell game started. The net result, though, was when we should have had more money going into the roads 20 years ago, we didn't. In 1997, we had a 4-cent increase in the gas tax. But because of politics, we did not increase the tax on diesel fuel because of lobbying from the trucking industry and other industrial businesses. So we have another shortfall that occurs in revenue. And unfortunately, the gas taxes that you pay at the pump are not indexed to inflation. They're fixed rates. So the sales tax, the income tax rather, or sales tax on wholesale gas is somewhat indexed for inflation. As the wholesale price of fuel increases, there is more revenue generated, but it's not going into the road system. It's going into general fund. And along with this, we've had flat revenue from gas taxes over the last 10 years. We went through an economic decline. We lost 10% of our population. We lost 12% of the registered motor vehicles. People were driving less. Newer vehicles got better gas mileage. Just a real disaster in terms of trying to predict a steady revenue stream. We all know what inflation has done over the last 10 years. It's been worse in the road maintenance business. The price of salt has had over a 100% increase in cost. The price of hot mix asphalt has gone up about 100%. The snowplow trucks that we're using, 10 years ago, we could buy a cab and chassis for $72,000. Current price is closer to $140,000. So all of these things impact our operational costs without having an increase offsetting it in income. Next slide, please. We talk for a minute here about the history of where the revenue comes from. There is a federal gas tax of about 18.4 cents. About 95% of what goes to Washington comes back. I guess we're lucky that they only keep 5% of it. But it comes back with restrictions. So roughly 25% of the money is allocated for 71% of the local roads under the federal aid system. The rest of it goes to MDOT. We have a 19-cent state tax on gasoline. This is the money that's generated here in Michigan and spent here in Michigan. It's distributed under Act 51 in what we call the MTF, the Michigan Transportation Fund, which says that 90% as a minimum goes to the road system. So if you look at that, it's 6 cents of every gallon you buy goes to MDOT, 6 cents goes to the road commissions, 3.5 to cities and villages for their road programs, 2% for public transportation, and a penny to the Economic Development Fund. Vehicle registrations generate income as long as people are buying vehicles, which the last year or two they have started doing again, and a small percentage of new cars sales tax. One of the problems, though, is the vehicle registration tax is an ad valorem tax. We've heard some talk about regressive taxes being undesirable. I personally think ad valorem taxes are undesirable. Why should the value of the vehicle I'm driving determine how much I pay in road taxes? It should be how many miles I drive and how heavy the vehicle is. Those are things that represent wear and tear in the roads. I see some people shaking heads here. Suppose, for example, I'm driving an expensive car, an aspiration vehicle, and I drive 2,000 or 3,000 miles a year with an $80,000 car. I would pay taxes of $400 and some in registration fee. Now you could be driving a 20-year-old vehicle that's a gas guzzler, weighs twice as much. You could drive 40,000 miles a year, and you might only pay $100 in registration fee. Is there an equity here? I think it's an inequity. I think the people who drive more, who wear the roads down more, should pay more for maintaining the roads. But that's my personal opinion. Next slide. The cost to build the roads to good condition. The state tax force about 3 years ago came up with a number of a little over $2 billion, about 2.2 billion. When the legislature and the administration started talking about solutions, they realized they were going to choke on that number. So you started hearing numbers like, well, 1.8 billion. And then it was a, well, $1.6 billion solution. And then a $1.4 million solution. And now it's a $1.2 billion solution. There's a problem. If you look at the delays that have accrued since the last assessment was done and the way the roads are deteriorating, by the time we generate more money, we're probably looking at a $3 billion a year problem. Now, we've analyzed our roads here in Ottawa County. We've costed out what it would take to bring every road up to good condition. Forget excellent, just we'll settle for good. It would require another $250 million in today's numbers. The slide says 230. That was last year's number. The roads have deteriorated. We're now up to about a $250 million solution to bring all the roads up today to good condition. We can't do it all at once, even if someone wrote a check for that. So we're estimating $30 million a year for 15 years to accomplish that. Once we get them up to good condition, we need another $10 million a year in addition to current revenue sources to keep them in good condition. So if you add inflation, you add the delays in getting funding in place, the number could be a lot higher. We don't know what it will be, but certainly a lot higher than the numbers and the current solutions that are proposed. Next slide. How can that be? Well, this is an interesting slide. If you start in 2015 and you estimate the cost to start repairing primary roads and local roads, the blue and the yellow lines, that represents the total cost to do it. If you start applying money year after year after year after year, you gradually get that chart headed in the right direction. And over 15 years, you can do it once. The problem is, those lousy red and green lines, that represents what it's going to cost to keep those roads in good condition. And over time, that number builds and it winds up just about equalizing in 15 years the current funding levels that would be available that you start with. So at this point, if you only have another $30 million a year, you're never going to dig yourself out of the problem. It's going to go on forever to keep the roads in good condition. And nobody's talking about raising that much money. Let's talk about solutions, the next slide. The Road Commission only controls expenses. We don't generate revenue. We can request the County Commission to put a millage on the ballot. We did that. The voters approved it. We got a $0.5 million approved, which is $5 million a year for the whole county. The Road Commission gets $4 million of that. Cities and villages get the other $1 million. There have been other suggestions, some which came out of this organization at a previous meeting. Local vehicle registration fees and taxes, increase the state vehicle registration fees, the ad valorem, local sales tax, create toll roads, or privatize the roads. We have a de facto program called road crumbling that's occurring in the state. Over the last 10 years, 140 miles of road have been dug up and crumbled back to gravel because they can't, the road commissions can't afford to maintain them, and gravel roads are a safer mode of transportation with a lower cost of maintenance. The last solution is raise the state sales tax 1%, give that to the schools, and give back the 6% wholesale gas tax to the roads. Now, some people have called Prop 1 a shell game. It could very well be that's a good description of it. I'm not here to defend Prop 1. I've been asked to speak from the pro table. All I can do is tell you, as a road commissioner, what the problem is and what the needs are, and talk about some of the ways to solve the problem. If we look at the conclusions, the next slide, the state has to raise the bulk of the funds. We've already done our share by raising $4 million a year in local millage. In Ottawa County, we need $30 million to fix the roads over a 15 to 20 year span of time. Prop 1, as it's been proposed, would generate about $12 million a year. If you take the 12 and the 4, that's $16 million in additional revenue to apply against a $30 million need. It's not going to solve the whole problem, but it's a start. So the other conclusion is we need to do something to index all sources of revenue to inflation, because that's part of the way we got ourselves into this dilemma by not having revenue sources that were fully defined and indexed to inflation. The last slide. We're not going to ask you to vote one way or another. We're going to ask you to help. And you have two ways to do that. There is one solution on the table. It's not the total solution. As I've said to a number of people, there's something in it to make everybody angry. There are things that I don't like about it. In fact, no one I've run across likes the whole package. Everybody has found something in it they don't like and don't agree with philosophically. The dilemma is lack of support for this solution creates a bigger problem going forward in the future. The longer we delay in generating revenue, the worse the problem will be, and the more money it's going to take to fix it when we finally do come up with a solution. So if you don't vote for this proposition, the burden's going to be on your backs. You're going to have to talk to your legislators. You're going to have to help come up with creative solutions that are going to work. And I can tell you, having worked with the legislature for the last 4 years on road funding issues, they were incapable of coming up with a solution that would pass the muster and would be approved. The makeup of our legislature has changed the last election cycle. Most of us would say, well, it changed for good, but the likelihood of reaching a consensus, I think, is diminished because I see more polarization from a philosophical point of view, and I think it's going to be harder to reach a consensus in the legislature for another solution that's going to be effective. There's been a crazy patchwork quilt of funding that has been arrived at over the years. Prop 1 is complex, has a lot of components to it. It's a crazy patchwork fix for a crazy patchwork problem. It's a shell game to correct previous shell games. And I guess the only thing I could suggest is whether you like it or not, if you can see to it to hold your nose and vote for it, there'll be some relief for the roads. If you don't want to vote for it, then be prepared for whatever comes in the future with a continued decline in our road system. Thank you.
A reminder, if you have questions for Tom after the panelists are done, write them down in 3x5 cards, and we'll collect them during the intermission, the recess, and then we'll ask them, all the panelists, the questions that you've submitted. The next panelist is Representative Curtin, speaking against adoption, Proposal 1.
Well, I don't have any real PowerPoint presentation to give you tonight. I appreciate Tom, you walking through that, and Cindy, you as well. It's great to be here this evening, see so much interest tonight in this topic. Obviously, this affects all of us, and this is kind of the big thing in Lansing right at the moment. I mean, it doesn't matter what else is going on. Everybody wants to know really about the roads and how we're going to fix the roads and how we're going to deal with this. And so I think it's, I think really it comes down to a situation where there hasn't been political will to do the right thing. And really, that's the situation. You don't have political courage, you don't have the leadership, and what has happened is that it's been easier, obviously, to expand, the welfare state and to spend money in those areas and not spend it on the road. And so what you have is you have a situation where they talk about the poor roads. Well, MDOT roads, the main roads, none of those really are in terrible disrepair. Very little of them that you'd say are in poor or extreme disrepair. It really is the roads that are, or maybe a small percentage, but it's really the secondary roads that are really in disrepair. In Public Act 51, the way that the money is distributed, the vast majority of the resources that are going to come in from expanding this are not going to go to your local potholes. It's just not going to happen. So if you think that your secondary road is really going to get a whole lot of money from this situation, it's not. First of all, we all know that there's a whole bunch of resources that have been added on or sort of bolted onto the top of this thing. I want to go back just a little bit and kind of just talk about the politics of it. So essentially, road funding came up during the lame duck and all last fall, and they went into lame duck, and obviously the State House had a version, they called it the Bolger plan, where there was no tax increase. Okay, it was essentially, there was going to be some road funding that was going to be provided, there was going to be some adjustments to the school aid fund and some things like that. And then essentially what would happen is that there wouldn't be a tax increase, but there would get, I think it was $1.2 billion to the roads annually. Then on the Senate side, they had obviously a much more grandiose proposal, raising taxes a little bit, sort of a combination of things, and came up with a $1.2 billion tax increase to fund the roads. So you had zero tax increase, fund the roads, a tax increase, fund the roads. They went into conference and came out with a $2.2 billion sales tax increase, changing the Constitution. Only in politics do you go in with one person saying, hey, let's do it with no tax increase and do 1.2. The other group going in with a small tax increase saying 1.2. And we come out saying, hey, we got it done. It's at $2.2 billion annually that we're going to spend. And some of that will get to the roads. Well, that really is sort of offensive, I think, to the taxpayers, to the citizens of the state. I think the whole thing is really disturbing, because what you have on top of that 1.2 is what you call political freight. Okay, so political freight, that's the idea that inside of that there's you have to pay off groups of people to get those groups of people to buy into the idea that they're going to change the Constitution. And so those resources are not going to the roads themselves. And I think that that's really disturbing for all of us. And so, obviously I wasn't in the legislature. Representative Gamrat was not in the legislature. I now sit in the legislature. Obviously I opposed it at that point, the idea that you had to have a tax increase. There is money down there in Lansing. I mean, right now you have to think about it. Right now there's, I think the numbers, Dave Agent was here in the back, and he had really wanted to give this speech himself, so he gave me his notes. And he is requiring, as a condition of our friendship, that I actually cover all these points. And if I don't, then it's all over. If I get it wrong, he's going to come take the mic. But really, there's 19 cents of state tax. There's 18.4 of federal tax. And whatever we spend on the roads out of those resources, we get a 4-to-1 match with the federal government. So they'll give us, for every dollar we spend on the roads, they'll give us $4. Which is, everybody thinks, well, that's a great deal, you want to max that out. But we forget that those federal dollars are also our tax dollars. And in Lansing, they don't understand that. You have to remember, Lansing is 12 blocks, I say it's 12 blocks, surrounded by reality. And their job is to think of creative ways to take your money and make you feel bad about it, and then spend it on things you'd never spend it on. That's what they do down there. And they do a really good job of it. I mean, it's really disturbing. You'll sit through these meetings and you'll hear about, the libraries, and libraries, they come before you, and they need $3 million more. And it really is disturbing when you sit in these committees, or to hear the stories, and they say, well, it's only $3 million more. And so, yeah, but, and everybody says, you can't be against libraries. I said, well, it's not against libraries. We're already giving them $400 million. They're just begging for $3 million more. And every group comes and does that. And they demand our time. They suck up every minute of our day, really just begging for more money. And that's what they do. And so the budget gets pushed up. So half the resources in the state budget goes to entitlements. Half of it. Half of it's transfer payments to Medicaid, to state-funded dental for children, child care for children. It just goes on and on and on. 142 government programs, I think it is, to help people. That's what you have. And so those are fixed. Nobody talks about that those things should be eliminated in any way. We're not going to cut those at all. So as a matter of fact, Representative Gamrat pointed out that there was $89 million taken out of transportation. So the politics were, obviously, they were looking for a way to do it during the lame duck, which is that December time. We came into the new year, what did we have? We had a sales tax increase proposal for the May 5th ballot. That's what's coming. We all see that happening. It isn't polling well, because really people are offended at the idea that they're asking for more, when in reality that they have the resources, they're just not prioritizing it the way that they should. And they're not looking at the constitutional mandates that are there for the things that really they're supposed to spend the money on. And people are okay with the idea of government, at least to a certain extent. I'm a small government, free market guy. I believe in, obviously, limited government, less taxes, lower spending, more liberty, more freedom, and really an adherence to the Constitution. And that's what Representative Gamrat is doing down there. I'm obviously on the east side of the state, but she is doing a hell of a job down there for you folks. Honestly, in appropriations, being many times the only no vote against the Republicans when it comes to the spending. So if it's a spending increase, she has voted no under enormous pressure from the leadership. Enormous pressure. And you say, well, what does one vote do? Well, it points out that there's somebody who's willing to vote no against spending increases. She's doing it. And I think that that's what you expect. You know, I went down there, and you know, I'm from the 82nd district, and you know, people said, well, when we reintroduced the funding plan to fund the roads without raising the taxes. We said, you know, there were some things you could do. You could end prevailing wage. The governor wouldn't do it. $300 or $400 million savings annually. The universities were already mentioned, which is hundreds of millions of dollars annually. You look at the National Resources Trust Fund, which is $500 million. Obviously, these are things that can be adjusted. There's plenty of resources just by adjusting these things that we already know. This isn't, you know, like, hey, wow, we don't really know what we could do. We have no idea. No, you can cut these things. You actually can do it. You can cut the things that are not in the Constitution, that are not mandated under the Constitution, and you have plenty of money to pave the roads from here to Escanaba. You got the money. The problem is nobody has the political will and the leadership to do it. There's no will down there to do it. So you have to understand, I mean, obviously on occasion there's more than the two of us voting no. Sometimes you'll get to 6 or 8 who will sort of buck against the leadership. But when you do that, essentially what happens is there's retribution that comes. That's what happens. And some people really bow to that much more quickly than others, and some do not. And so I've made it obviously my pledge that I don't work, and I've tried to tell them this when I put in the plan, and people told me, well, you can't put that plan in. We can't do that. If you guys put that plan in, that'll undermine the governor's plan to raise the sales tax. I said, I know. That's why I'm doing it. That's why we're here. You know, that's what we thought long and hard. That's exactly why we did it. We wanted to let people know there were other options down there. And furthermore, you know, we don't work for the governor. We work for the people that elected us. She works for the 80th district, I work for the 82nd. That's what we're here for. You know, I went down there, unfortunately, I have to tell you this in full disclosure, you know, I'm a lawyer. I was an accountant first and a lawyer. My mother's still wondering if I can actually go to heaven. And I don't know. It's still up in the air, because I can tell you, I swear a lot more now that I'm down there. And a lot of times it's in prayer when I'm doing it. I mean, I have no words to even be able to describe to you, you know, how offensive it is to sit with Republicans who are absolutely okay with the idea of increasing the spending, while at the same moment telling you and railing against the idea that government's growing and that taxes are increasing. They'll vote for it over and over. They'll say it. They'll say, hey, you know what, it's awful. It's terrible. The spending down here is awful. And then they'll vote yes. And then they'll go right back to their district and give a speech on how terrible it is in Lansing and how the spending keeps increasing. That's what, I'm not even kidding. It defies the imagination, what you see down there. So you can just pray for us, because it does get really, really challenging at times. She handles it better than I do. And there are a few others that we found that are willing to stand against sort of this sort of mindset that's down there, is that what happens for representatives, and I think it happens for many people, is what you start to do is you start to become a part of that club down there. And once you become a part of that club, then they become more important to you, and sort of the will of the club and the people that you are spending your time with becomes more important than the people that sent you there. And unfortunately, that's how it happens. And so what we find is that there is the resources down there. It's down there. It can be done. There's plenty of money. One of the things is we have a 6% sales tax on our gas. and it doesn't go to the roads. So, so already we have this situation where the prioritizing is not really leading towards good infrastructure. They have the resources. I believe you guys send it back to the legislature. What they're going to do when they cut the transportation is they set it up so that now there's even less money for transportation. The governor will throw up his hands. They'll say, okay, fine, the legislature needs to do something about this, and you need to increase the taxes. And so it's going to set up the fall where there's going to be an enormous amount of pressure on the people on this side, meaning in the House and then in the Senate, to then come back and increase taxes without doing it through the Constitution. It's all a setup, the whole thing. So what I'm trying to tell you folks is that all that political maneuvering, when they're doing that, essentially it's creating the situation where they're trying to say there is no other option, there are no plan Bs. There's not only plan B, there's plan B, C, D, E, F, G, you just keep going on. There are plenty of ways to get to the money. The problem is there isn't the leadership that's willing to take the steps and make the hard calls to get us to that spot. So I would just say vote no on Prop 1 on May 5th. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Todd. I think, if I heard you correctly, you just scolded us very severely. We have one more. Before we get to our last panelist, Steve, let me again remind you that if you have questions for any of the panelists, write them on the 3x5 cards, and that includes any members of the media who are here this evening. If there are, they are just put a little M in the corner of your card, and so I'll make sure that I note the media questions. And then our final presenter is Steve Bolthouse. He's the executive director for Macatawa Area Council. Yes.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk a little bit about this very important issue. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Macatawa Area Coordinating Council, we tend to go by our acronym MAC. We are a council of governments here in the Holland-Zeeland area representing 9 townships and 2 cities as well as 2 counties. And one of our core functions is to allocate federal surface transportation dollars that come to the Holland-Zeeland area. And Tom had alluded to those in his presentation today. So in addition to those units of government, both county and local, we also have representation from the Michigan Department of Transportation and County Road Commissions on our board. And then to round it out, the organizers and the people who established the MAC felt it was important to have a private sector component to it. So our board also has 4 voting members that come from the private sector as well. So it helped balance out the elected officials on our board. So I'm sitting at this panel today because our policy committee, our governing board, endorsed Proposal 1 back in March. Next slide, please. And we talked about that, right? So we can go right to the next one. It's March 9, and I'm at my office, and a young gentleman comes into the lobby, and he says, "Can you point me in the direction of the closest tire shop?" And I asked him, of course, why. He's a laborer from Muskegon. It's dark at this time of the morning on March 9. He's heading to his job site out at the old Chris Craft plant on Analine, and he hits a pothole. You'll see the pothole at the end. And this is the damage to his vehicle. He ended up with flat tires. Fortunately, he had the presence of mind not to do an evasive maneuver and hit the vehicle next to him, sideswipe him, have that vehicle cross the center line, and we all know what happens when 2 vehicles meet head-on, going 45 miles an hour. Stayed in his lane, was able to hit his brakes at the last moment, lost both of his tires. Fortunately, he was able to keep his rims because he was able to reduce his speed. There's the tow truck to come pick up his vehicle, there in the bottom left. Within the hour, the County Road Commission, one of Tom's employees there, was there to patch that hole. So fortunately, no other motorist, at least this day, had the same fate. This situation is going on all across the state, and thank God he didn't swerve out and sideswipe that car next to him or cross over the center lane. So, one of the prompts from the moderator tonight was, what can happen if a proposal doesn't pass? And to Representative Gamrat's point, you do hear these little rumors about what possibly could happen, but we haven't heard a lot of other firm alternatives come forward at this time. She spoke about some of the policies about that, but the reality is we haven't heard many solid solutions out there. I have heard a couple of those and just want to share them about things we could do. Next slide. One is, let's have Washington solve this for us. So, there's a federal interest in the transportation system. General Eisenhower, he's flying over continental Europe. During the war, he was very impressed at how the Germans could move their troops and machinery around on their Autobahn. He said, the U.S. needs one of those. And as he watched the Allies struggle to do so. When he became President Eisenhower, he fulfilled that dream, and we ended up with the interstate system that we have today. And it's actually the U.S. Interstate and Highway Defense Act was the initial appropriation for it. And the department, or the Congress has, kept that in place, of course, ever since we have our interstate system. It's certainly helped the defense. It's certainly helped us maintain our economic vitality over the decades since it was developed. So, the current surface transportation legislation puts up about $50 billion nationwide. Tom's presentation alluded to of that 18.4 cents that we send in our federal gas tax. We get about 95 cents back from that. Someone's got to pay for the roads in Montana and Idaho, I guess. So we're scheduled this year, Michigan's share of that is going to be a little less than $1 billion, $962 million. That's what we're scheduled to receive. But we're only, right now, intending to get $635 million of that. Why? Next slide, please. Because the federal surface transportation legislation expires May 30th. Has Congress fixed it yet? No. And the reason they haven't fixed it is because a parallel funding to the Michigan Transportation Fund is the Highway Trust Fund. That's where your federal gas tax goes to. And it's been teetering on insolvency for the last several years. The surface transportation legislation sends out about $50 billion. The Highway Trust Fund takes in about $34 billion. So Congress, for the last several years, has had to supplement the Highway Trust Fund from the fees coming in from the gas tax with general fund appropriations to be able to meet the $50 billion level. So, if you think it's been a challenge in Lansing coming up with a transportation solution, watch what's going on in Washington. My prediction is Congress on about May 28 or 29 will come up with a solution. And it'll be a patch, probably just, hopefully at least to the end of the fiscal year, if not a little bit farther. So I would maintain that let's not look to Washington to solve the state transportation issue that we have here. Next slide, please. So, what's the ramifications? Now I'm still talking about the federal, but also the state funding shortfall comes into play. We maintain a 4-year transportation program. When it was put together 2 years ago in January, so January 2013, it was put in place. Less than a year later, I hear from MDOT officials that a project that was scheduled to be constructed this year on southbound I-196 from just south of Holland, where US 31 and the interstate meet, down to essentially the Saugatuck exit, was scheduled to be reconstructed for a total of $16.4 million. They said, well, we need to, if you can see the bottom of the slide, rebalance the program. That project has been delayed to 2019. So the next time you're heading down to Saugatuck or other points southward, when you're riding along that long, think about the Department of Transportation trying to maintain that road for another 4 years before it's replaced. I would have to respectfully disagree with a comment made earlier about our roads not being in good shape. That road's in horrible shape, and they're going to have to cobble it together. They've already been cobbling it together. They're going to have to do that for another 4 years. And then lastly, another is, well, if we don't have a solution, or while we're waiting for a legislative solution, I guess we're just going to have to keep patching. If you've never seen the evolution of a pothole, here it is. It's kind of like the rings on a tree. This pothole started right next to the gutter pan. That's where the curb comes down, that little concrete section. And then the second year, you can see the next ring there, and then the next ring in the next year. Last year, the road commission came through, patched this hole 4 times. This year, they've been in twice already, trying to keep that together. You can see when the cold patch pops out of that pothole, the debris fills in the curb strip there. So this is, in my opinion, this is probably Plan B. And how many more years of having to do this? Thanks.
Again, reminder, if you have questions, write them on the 3x5 card. We're going to take a 5-minute recess. But before you get out of your seats, I've been told by my leader he wants to speak to you again.
We have 2 important announcements. I talked about this wonderful facility. It's a church that I go to. And however, this church also has a mortgage. This building costs a couple $. And so even though I'm a member, we pay rent here. The Ottawa County Patriots do not receive any funding from any kind of national organization. No millionaires or billionaires give us any money at all. Our money comes from our pockets. And as a result, we pass the hat at our meetings. Sometimes we do a 50-50 thing. Tonight we're going to pass the hat, so to speak. It's actually not a hat, it's a plastic bucket. And as it comes around, we urge you to please be generous, help us defer our expenses. And please, if you have a question, write it down. There are bathrooms, etc., out in the hallway. We have coffee, cookies, thanks to Ann Smith. She brings in really good stuff. And we very much appreciate your coming. And I will hold any comments I have to the very end. Yeah, do we need more cards? Oh, yeah. Okay, we'll come around. Just hold up your hands. We'll come around and pick up the question first. If anybody needs any more blanks, you're walking to me. Anybody's got questions, please pass them on. Oh.
It's a hard question, you ask her.
No one's talked about that at all. No one's ever said anything about Washington in front of it. No one's talked about it. He was saying that's the guy. Because Orwell. He said he hasn't heard that's a lot about Washington. $3 billion. Guess what? We have about another 107 at a county level. Find all the counties excess funds that they're just keeping away out, not the rainy day fund. That's something else. They can save it. So he gave it away. These guys come up with McMaster's laid it out. He's laid out $4 billion. Snyder even ended up trying to do himself, right? What happened is I knew nobody else She's tired. She's hanging in there. Would you ever,
talking,
on
and
record,
then
would you ever think about anything local? Or are you
I haven't seen him in a while. He's totally changed.
yeah, the hike visit, right? Between Amashes, right?
Because he
Pretty
used
sure.
to come and go.
You have to take care of his money.
I know we talked before, I said, I agree with you, 95 out of 100 issues.
Man's gotta have a job anyway. Which role is easier?
This.
Is it?
This is positively either I'm going broke or I've got money coming in, whichever.
It's just math.
That's right, it's just math. Nothing else guessing. And I don't really care, Mike. Well, they were there. I got something to do.
He's the one that stopped my illegal immigration. I think she got somebody.
I'm going to go you know, this afternoon, I got home. I did 3 hours stints over in this car. I got home and I was looking for
I don't like them.
and I knew I had to come here. But I was ready to come.
Not a fan, as you can see.
What's another one?
She's pretty good. She's running around here somewhere.
Oh, she's here tonight?
Yeah.
I didn't see her.
It's kind of hard to see when you get like tall people around.
The solution is, here's how he looks. Here's how he looks.
Doesn't bother her though.
Oh, no, she laughs.
There she is.
She laughs and threatens it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. She'll threaten to beat you up though.
Yeah.
He actually, I don't know where Jeff Hubbard, he actually, Jeff Hubbard called him out on that, and he actually called Jeff out. Jeff had it on tape.
He's the one that helped get that passed. As soon as he did that, he got a lot of money from the hospital. Because the hospitals are Medicaid rates and what they get from Medicaid.
Thank you. How you doing? Good, good. I'm
I don't think you should try that. What else? Oh, he lied to me about I didn't want to get sick. He didn't. That's what he did. Farm girls.
Well, he, I mean, we very nice someone.
Oh. He never goes where he knows he's going to go.
Speaking of Jeff Hubbard, you guys know each other, right? Oh, yeah.
So what have you been up to?
What's that?
He's kind of back.
Oh yeah, no, I see him every once in a while.
Because of his brother down here. You gotta have $500,000, speaking Bibles, you know, and pay people to get no, I want to pay people to get signatures. To get the part-time legislature and get.
I like what Jeff is talking about. Define part-time legislature for my connotation. Define session legislature. I also like the idea of keeping.
Could I ask you to get back to your seats? Our short 5-minute recess, which I turned into a 6-minute recess, is over.
So paying for it, I ran some money on the kids. I want them to have a regular job. So they can, and then I want to have to all these because there's no need to have all of this when you're only there for 3 months a year. Now they're not as well.
It seems like it's probably true what they say. Pretty good salary where they can live comfortably. And then hanging out with each other.
I'd like to ask people in the front of the room to go back to their seats. People like the president of the OCP and the vice president of the OCP.
He had 95% of his all his money for his election from tax. 95% money for individual donations. Well, the question was, who's representing the people?
We're not going to be able to get to all of the questions. I have to do quick time. We have 47 questions. In 30 minutes, we're not going to do. This is not. We're not. We're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. Yes. So we're going to. I have arbitrarily selected a few questions to address to our panelists. I hope that makes us go. This is,
You're redistricting and he made sure he had that little seat.
Can somebody find Cindy Gilmer?
Oh, I think so. Yes, we charge
Yes, we have light. But we don't have Cindy. Ah, here she comes. Jim, can I ask you to put a microphone on each table so that, well, there are 3 microphones over here. Put one on each table. All right. Where is our sound control?
Nobody else did that.
Mine still works.
Here he comes, here he comes, here he comes.
I can't answer the question.
Don't point your mics towards each other.
Right.
That's always,
Mic away from each other.
Don't.
okay. It's my fault. All right. So we have 30 minutes, and like I said, 47 questions. First one is for, whoops, lost the first one. This one, first question is for Tom or Steve. How many people have really been killed directly by failing roads in Ottawa County and in the whole state?
I don't think we keep those statistics. And we do follow up with every accident involving personal injury or fatality to examine traffic safety issues to see if there are ways to improve it, but we don't keep track of the cause of the accident relative to road condition.
And I would ask the question, how many lives a year are we willing to sacrifice? It's 100 okay to lose, 100 fatalities. Is any more than one?
The next question is, somebody just turned on my light. What are you trying to do? What are you telling me?
It's
Right.
on.
I guess this is directed to, well, I don't know. After you hear the question, you decide who wants to answer. I have received several, I'm reading the card here, I've received several Proposition 1 yes mailers. Who is paying for these?
We are.
Anybody want?
Hello, okay. I'm not home much anymore, so I don't know what mailers you're talking about specifically, so maybe these guys want to chime in, but I can tell you that, doesn't it say on here? Is it paid for? Paid for by Safe Roads, yes, with regulated funds. I can tell you that as representatives, we were given a little card that was paid for by taxpayer dollars that you can send out that talks about Prop 1 and the good and the bad. Kind of, it was supposed to give both sides of it, has our picture on it and all that. I didn't send that out. I couldn't send that out because to me it was too biased. It was missing a whole lot of information and I couldn't put, I don't think you sent yours out as well. So for those in my district, you didn't get that one. But I don't know, do you know about these?
I can tell you, as you, this lady set up here in front, we pay for that because essentially what happens is that money's being invested because those groups are going to get back more money at the end from having the prop pass. And that's sort of that sick and twisted, you know, situation that we have in government where they lobby from government and then they donate to the people in power. And so it's political favoritism that happens. And you see it, you know, you see it everywhere down there. So this situation, it's a group, obviously it's hidden, the regulated funds, but it was very disturbing when they were willing to pay for, out of state funds, a flyer for us to promote Prop 1. You know, so I didn't agree to that. You know, obviously there was, it was all nuanced, obviously, to say, hey, you know, here's sort of the pluses and here are the minuses, but it really sort of slanted the whole conversation with Prop 1. I didn't feel like that was a good use of your dollars for my district, and so my district didn't receive it, and I don't think Cindy's district received it either. So, but yeah, so you end up paying for it.
Okay. The next question is for Steve. Why should this so-called road tax I think he feels very powerful over it. Maybe we should send it to Lance. Why should this so-called road tax also contain hundreds of millions of dollars for revenue sharing and general fund dollars? Aren't these additions just bribes for local government support?
So if I understand the question correctly, you're wondering why there's all the other add-ons besides the just the roads itself. And I think probably the representatives can better answer that in terms of, you know, it went through the political process. I mean, that's how the sausage was made. And my understanding is, Tom mentioned in his presentation that they were, I think the intent of the legislature was to try to hold harmless those entities, mainly the public school fund, as well as local units of government, as well as, I think the earned income tax credit is a nod to the fact that a sales tax increase is regressive, and so I think there were those in the legislature who wanted to see some relief for the most vulnerable in our society. So I think it was an attempt to keep those entities whole that were going to be harmed when the sales tax was removed.
It's just something really quick. It's about 40% of the Prop 1 that doesn't actually go to roads. And so what you have here, I think, is a little bit of a deception, and I know what you're saying, but all the conversations focused on roads, right? They get you to do this because the roads are so bad, the roads are so bad. And 40% of it doesn't even go to the roads. And so I think what I've been hearing is they want a clean bill, and they want, if we're gonna focus on the roads, and which I think we need to raise money for the roads, I'm not saying that, but let's do that then in a way that just is a clean bill and focuses on the roads.
Cindy brings up an excellent point. Some of the things that gall me about the proposal are the cost of doing business. What did they have to put in there in order to get everybody's support for it? My understanding is if Prop 1 passes and the sales tax increases and the tax on fuel at the wholesale level goes to the roads instead of to the schools and revenue sharing as it does right now, there has to be a makeup from the 1% tax to cover the loss to the schools and to local revenue sharing. Any anything beyond that, the legislature has the ability to change. If you're not happy with $200 million going to mass transit, you can adjust Act 51 and change the formula for distribution. If you're not happy with some of the other components of those other 10 bills, they can be amended or killed. So the legislature is in control of correcting grievances or errors that might be made along the way. And hopefully they will, if the proposition passes, hopefully they will address that and streamline the whole process.
Thank you, Tom. Well, this is actually to me and okay. If the proposal fails, how do you, on the opposing side, who oppose the votes of Prop 1, propose to raise the dollars to repair the roads without a regressive tax, such as the sales tax, without cutting services to the poor and the middle class? Why are no yes legislatures here? Now, I'm going to address the second part.
They won't come.
Speaking now on behalf of the OCT, we invited the Lieutenant Governor. We invited our Lemidval. What I can go down. They were all. It's not important enough for us to be there. So we did our best to provide legislative perspective on Prop 1 by those who advocated for it and authored it. Okay? They're not here. But we try over and over again to have them join us this evening to explain to you why it's important to vote for Prop 1. And I think, again, Steve and Tom, who are making a very compelling case for Prop 1. Okay? So, now back to the question to Cindy and to Todd. If the proposal fails, how do you propose to raise the dollars to repair the roads without a regressive tax, such as the sales tax, and without cutting services to the poor and the middle class?
I only answer the easy ones. Cindy answers the hard ones. So I'll let her go first. Ladies first.
Okay, I touched on it a little bit earlier, but, and I did bring, you guys are welcome to look through this budget if you want, but what Representative Corser said earlier, the money is in here, and you don't necessarily even have to cut whole entire programs upon programs. They keep expanding these programs. Every year they expand the programs, and so you can look at it this way. Our government has went up, our state budget, $1 billion every year for the last I don't know how many years. Just take that, right? So it's not even that you have to go into them and cut them. Just quit expanding them. You could even just stop right there, you know. But there are places that I believe that we can cut, and without even, and it goes back to that political will and that political fortitude, you know, and that's part of the problem. And it's easier to ask for more money out of taxpayer pockets than it is to have all the special interest groups at your door lobbying and, you know, saying how much they need this and that. And for every program, the problem with these programs, in my opinion, is the administration there's so much administrative top-heavy costs to run these programs that don't even get to, you know, the different places that it's intended to be. So I have two answers for you tonight. One that I do is I don't meet with the lobbyists, so that's pretty simple. Then I don't have to worry about them at my door knocking on and bothering me. But number two is, and I just want to say this point before we leave here tonight at some time, that really the answer is with the people of the state, and I think they're woken up now. Someone mentioned talk to your representatives. I think it was at your table there, And I will give you the secret that gets me in trouble in Lansing. And it is, it's getting me in trouble. Is you need to put pressure on your representatives. You need to be the ones that they're hearing from over and above the special interest lobbyist groups. So.
Would you want to say some more?
I probably can give you a couple, but I would just say, I would say one is we have an incredible amount of corporate pork. You know, the MEDC, you know, I can't stand entitlements to begin with, but corporate entitlements are particularly egregious to me. So, you know, the idea that we're giving to favored corporations and continuing to do that. And so we have on the books of really the MEDC, it's hundreds of millions of dollars that you're talking about annually. And also these legacy costs from what are called mega credits that will go on for years and years, some will go on for 15 or 20 years, that obligate really us to pay out, they're saying between $9 and $12 billion. So really what you have is, you have a situation where it's not Democrats or Republicans anymore, it's the political class and the rest of us. And you know, it is when you're looking at that, it's sort of the idea is those people that are connected get those you know, juicy benefits, and they're making their living off of the idea of getting access to government at higher and higher levels. So it is absolutely required that you put pressure on your legislators. That, you know, that'll probably get me thrown out of caucus by even saying that. And I'll be saying it some more as we go forward, but it's absolutely essential that they hear from you. And you know, if you don't go to Lansing and you don't spend that time and you don't know those committee hearings, going and showing up and putting in your card and giving your 2 cents on issues that matter to you, and going around and letting them know you're watching matters. It really does matter. And so, you know, you guys here, obviously, you know, on this side, you know, Representative Gamrat's done a great job. And it's also making sure that you hold her up in her campaigning, and also letting her know, because she comes under tremendous attack, and just making sure that that representative, as she's trying to explain what can be done, the attacks come. So, you know, supporting her, 1, in prayer, and 2, you know, financially, and then 3rd, making sure that you're, you know, that you're advocating for the policies that will bring forward, you know, good, sound, you know, principles of sound governance. Advocating for those so that people understand that there is a way forward, and the way forward is to cut back on the entitlement culture that really is pervasive inside of our state and across the nation. And if we do that, there's plenty of money to take care of the core responsibility of government.
Puppet up here. How this next question is for Tom or Steve. How does the warranting of the roads by the contractors save money?
When you buy a new car, you get a warranty with it. If you want an extended warranty, you pay more. It's an insurance policy. To the extent that there's legislation that imposes a longer warranty period on the roads, there's going to be a cost that goes with it, and it's going to drive up the cost to do that work on the roads on an equal basis. So I'm not so concerned about that. We have warranties in place for the initial work. We inspect all the work. If it's not done properly, it gets redone or corrected. If that's one of the outcomes of legislation, fine, we'll live with it. But don't fool yourselves into thinking you're going to get something more for the same amount of money. It's not going to happen.
Thank you, Tom.
Mike, sorry. Can I just say something really quick on that? Look in the Lansing State Journal, just did a great article on the warranties and really uncovered the guts of it. And I think it's a great point you ever brought that up, because it goes to the expense of the roads. And when we're talking about, we're not just talking about where does the money come from, but how is the money being spent? Okay, but we also need to look at how is the money being spent. Does it make sense to spend them on the warranties? And there's a lot of issues already with the warranties as they sit right now. So sometimes throwing good money after bad isn't the solution just because we increase the spending. We have to look at how it's being spent and that making sure every dollar is spent wisely. Lansing State Journal has a great article on the warranties.
Thank you. Also for Tom and Steve, does the Prop 1 bidding process require contractors to be paid prevailing wage? The prevailing wage. Will the prevailing wage laws apply?
My understanding is on the federal aid projects, the prevailing wage provision applies. On our local bidding, it does not. To the extent our legislature can give us relief there, that's savings that comes right to the bottom line. I'd be all in favor of it.
Does everybody know what prevailing wage is? Everybody? Okay, yeah, sorry. It's all that government technical stuff. Essentially, prevailing wage is, it requires government to pay a higher price for labor. It's sort of a law that's put in place when really there was strong union power. And so what happened was they required government to pay top rate. So if your labor costs you $30 an hour, the state of Michigan will probably pay $65 an hour. Okay, so that essentially on every hour that they work. And so they're required to be paid a higher rate of pay on particular jobs. I mean, that's just an example, but essentially it can be that egregious. So what happens is it can be, $300 or $400 more million that is paid prevailing wage on state contracts. Now, if there's federal money involved, then what's called Davis-Bacon applies, and we can't get out of federal prevailing wage. But when it's only state dollars, then you can actually, if we were to change that law, save the state taxpayers a couple $100 million bucks. So that just gives you an understanding. It was something many years ago that was put in place that forces the state to pay not only on construction for roads, but on pretty much everything. So, okay.
Thank you. With a very substantial part of, this is for Tom, sorry. With a very substantial part of the first 2 years of the new taxes collected going to pay off old road bonds, what will the approximately $200 million per year be used for after the first 2 years of bond payoff?
One of the dilemmas of having inadequate funding in the past resulted in MDOT going out and saying, well, we don't have the money to do the repairs to these sections of roads, so we'll float bonds and we'll finance it. So they float 20-year bonds to do a project that has a life of 10 years. Well, okay, 10 years later, now what do? Do you float more bonds, and now you're mortgaged out twice as much for that same stretch of road? They're trying to correct that error with one of the bills, and one of the ways they're doing that is, and maybe it's logical, maybe it isn't, but the argument goes, well, if we give you $12 million the first year, you're not going to be able to spend it because there won't be enough contractors around to do the work. So we'll give it to you in stair steps. We'll give you, $2 million the first year, and $4 million the second year, and $8 million the third year, and then $12 million. And we'll use that money up front to pay down the bonds for MDOT. So when you look at it that way, 80% of the money that's raised by Prop 1 in the first 2 years goes to MDOT, not to the local road system. On the other hand, I can argue, well, it makes sense. Why continue to pay for bonds on roads that are deteriorating and need work for repair? Let's get rid of the debt load of the bonds and try to dig ourselves out of that hole and make the system work going forward on a cash in, cash out basis. So yeah, I'm not opposed to that personally. Would I like to see more money from Prop 1 sooner? Yeah, because it means we can start tackling our problems sooner. But you know, we all have to live through this process together.
Thank you. Tom, Cindy or Todd, why did the House reject the Senate plan and the Senate reject the House plan to fix the roads in December? What are the two plans? And we have reduced taxes over the years. Why not just raise the taxes back up again?
Do you want me to answer that one? Oh, is that how it works? Okay. I actually don't understand the question. That's normally what I say when I need more time. We'll figure it out.
I'll read it.
No, you don't. I'm sorry, you don't have to. I think the idea is there was a House plan. The House plan was the Bolger plan. And at the end of his term, he came up with this plan. It was called the Bolger plan. We actually reintroduced the Bolger plan, which said it was going to actually take money away from the from education, a couple $100, I think it's $400 and some dollars, to essentially pay for it. But growth in the economy would make that up, and so the education wouldn't really lose any dollars to begin with, or in the end. Essentially, on the Senate side, they came up with a couple of taxes that were going to happen on fuels, and so that would sort of raise the money on their side. Neither side was going to get there. The governor obviously wanted more resources. The House plan wasn't really going to pass, you know, when it came to the idea of the Senate. So the House overwhelmingly passed it. It came through. There was no way the Senate was going to take it. So they go into conference behind closed doors, and they came out with the idea of, okay, let's just kick it to the voters. So none of our hands are really on this thing. We'll kick it to the voters and force the voters to decide. And that's how you went from 1.2 to 2.2. And I think we've already kind of discussed how all that happens. And so essentially now it's in your lap. And you know, the idea is nobody really wants their hands on a tax increase like that. You have to remember, you know, a 1% sales tax increase, because 43 or 45% of the budget, I think, is federal funds. So about $30 billion is collected, give or take, from the state taking it out of our pockets. The rest of it's the federal government taking it out of our pockets and then giving it back to the state. So essentially about $30 billion. So this increases what the government's taking out of our pockets by $2.2 billion, which essentially is about a 6% increase in the size of state government. And so just think about it that way. It's a massive increase in the amount of the size and scope of government.
Can I just say one quick thing again about tax increases? Michigan is already, if you look at lowest or highest, it's like 46 in the nation of tax burden if you look at local and state tax burden on its citizens. So we already have a tremendous burden with a shaky economy. I don't think the answer is necessarily always just throwing money at things. It's doing it wisely. And I think it was Tom that brought up Act 51. I would love to sit down with you and actually go to the root of the problem. And he mentioned 30%, they have 71% of the major roads locally, but only get 25% of the funding. But when you have